There was a minute of silence in the Congressional chamber. Jim Jordan had just asked her Jasmine Crockett, "What are you doing here?" But the file in Jasmine's hand proved that Jordan had hidden the answer to the real question 23 years ago. The morning had started like any other oversight hearing. Routine questions about federal spending, predictable partisan posturing, the usual Washington theater. Jordan had entered the chamber with his trademark swagger, his sleeves already rolled up, ready for battle. He thrived in these moments. The combative exchanges, the viral clips, the righteous indignation that played so well with his base. But Jasmine Crockett had come prepared for a different kind of confrontation entirely. She had spent 3 sleepless nights reviewing the documents that had arrived mysteriously at her office the previous week. No return address, no explanation, just a manila envelope containing 2 decades of carefully preserved secrets, the kind of secrets that powerful men assumed would stay buried forever. As Jordan settled into his seat, adjusting his tie and scanning the witness list with barely concealed disdain, Jasmine quietly placed a thick manila folder on her desk. She didn't announce it, didn't draw attention to it. She simply waited. The hearing began with testimony from various federal officials about budget allocations and oversight procedures, standard fare that would normally put C-SPAN viewers to sleep. But Jasmine wasn't listening to the testimony. She was studying Jordan, watching his patterns, his tells, his moments of vulnerability. 23 minutes into the hearing, Jordan took his turn to question a witness about Department of Education funding. His tone was aggressive, accusatory, designed more for sound bites than actual information gathering. It was vintage Jim Jordan, all bluster and attack, no substance or genuine inquiry. "This administration has completely failed our students," Jordan declared, his voice rising with practiced indignation. "They've prioritized woke ideology over student safety, political correctness over protection of our children." The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. But Jordan was just getting started. "Where I come from," he continued, "we believe adults have a responsibility to protect young people under their care. We believe in accountability. We believe that when someone fails in that sacred trust, there must be consequences." That's when Jasmine saw her opening. As Jordan's voice reached its crescendo, as his finger wagged with moral authority, she quietly opened her manila folder. "Congressman Jordan," she said, her voice calm but carrying clearly across the chamber. The room fell silent. This wasn't how these hearings usually went. Members typically waited their turn, followed protocol, maintained the illusion of collegiality. Jordan looked surprised, then annoyed. "I believe I still have time remaining, Congresswoman." "You do," Jasmine replied evenly. "But I have a question about your comments regarding the sacred trust between adults and young people under their care." Jordan's eyes narrowed. Something in her tone, something in the way she held that folder, set off alarm bells. But his ego wouldn't let him back down. "What about it?" "Well," Jasmine said, lifting the first document from her folder, "I'm curious about how that philosophy applied during your time as assistant wrestling coach at Ohio State University." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Jordan's face went very still. "I don't see how my coaching career has any relevance to today's hearing." "Oh, but it does," Jasmine replied, her voice still maddeningly calm. "Because you just spoke so passionately about adults protecting young people under their care, about accountability, about consequences for those who fail in that sacred trust." She placed the document on the desk in front of her, angling it so the cameras could see. "This is a non-disclosure agreement dated March 15, 2001. It was signed by Marcus Thompson, a 19-year-old wrestler at Ohio State, and it bears your signature as a witness." The chamber erupted in whispers and shifting bodies. Jordan's mouth opened, then closed. For perhaps the first time in his congressional career, Jim Jordan was speechless. "Congresswoman Crockett," the committee chairman intervened, "I'm not sure this line of questioning is appropriate for today's hearing." "With respect, Mr. Chairman," Jasmine replied, "Congressman Jordan made student safety and adult accountability central to his questioning. I'm simply exploring the consistency of his positions. Jordan found his voice, though it came out rougher than usual. This is completely out of order. This is a political hit job, and I won't— You won't what? Jasmine interrupted, her voice cutting through his bluster like a scalpel. You won't discuss your role in silencing sexual abuse victims? You won't explain why you witnessed legal documents designed to keep young men quiet about their trauma? The word trauma hung in the air like smoke. This wasn't political theater anymore. This wasn't about budget allocations or partisan point scoring. This was about something far more serious, far more personal. Jordan tried to regain his footing. I don't know what sick game you're playing here, but I will not allow you to— This isn't a game, Congressman Jordan, Jasmine said, her voice steady as bedrock. This is an accounting, and it's long overdue. She reached for a second document. Tell me, do you remember Marcus Thompson? Jordan's jaw clenched. I coached hundreds of young men. I can't be expected to— Marcus Thompson was a sophomore from Akron. He was studying engineering. He was the first in his family to attend college. Jasmine's voice carried a hint of emotion now, controlled but present. He was also sexually assaulted by Dr. Richard Strauss in the university medical facility on February 28, 2001. The chamber was dead silent. Even the court reporters had stopped typing. 2 weeks later, Jasmine continued, Marcus came to you. He trusted you. He believed you would help him, protect him, support him. Instead, you arranged for him to meet with university lawyers who pressured him to sign this NDA in exchange for continued scholarship support. She held up the document so the cameras could capture it clearly. Jordan's signature was visible at the bottom, right next to Marcus Thompson's shaky 19-year-old handwriting. Jordan's face had gone pale, but he rallied. Even if that were true, and I'm not admitting anything, that was over 20 years ago. The statute of limitations— There is no statute of limitations on moral accountability, Jasmine said quietly. And there's certainly no expiration date on the harm you caused. She reached for a third document. How about Kevin Morrison? Do you remember him? Jordan's hands were now gripping the edge of his desk. I'm not going to sit here and— Kevin Morrison was a junior from Cincinnati, pre-med student. Dreamed of becoming a team doctor himself someday. Jasmine's voice was like a prosecutor laying out evidence. He was assaulted by Dr. Strauss on 3 separate occasions in the spring of 2001. Another NDA appeared on the screen, another signature. When Kevin came to you, you told him that speaking up would destroy not just his own future, but the futures of his teammates. You told him that real men handle things privately. You told him that the team was depending on his silence. Jasmine paused, letting the weight of those words settle. Kevin Morrison never became a doctor. He dropped out of school 3 months later and never returned. He spent the next 2 decades believing he was weak, believing he was the problem, believing he had failed his team by not being strong enough to handle his trauma privately. The silence in the chamber was deafening. Jordan looked like a man watching his entire world crumble in real time. He spent the next 2 decades believing he was weak, believing he was the problem, believing he had failed his team by not being strong enough to handle his trauma privately. The silence in the chamber was deafening. Jordan looked like a man watching his entire world crumble in real time. Michael Rodriguez, 20 years old, full academic scholarship, 3 separate assaults. NDA signed May 2, 2001. Your signature, your witness. Anthony Williams, 18 years old, youngest on the team. Assault occurred May 15, 2001. When he came to you, you told him that going public would ruin his life and destroy his family's reputation. NDA signed May 30, 2001. Document after document, signature after signature. A systematic pattern of silence, orchestrated and maintained by the man who now spent his days attacking others for their supposed ethical failures. Jordan tried desperately to interrupt, to deflect, to regain control of the narrative. This is harassment. This is a partisan attack designed to— 17, Jasmine said, her voice cutting through his protests. 17 young men, Congressman Jordan. 17 voices silenced, 17 futures altered, 17 lives forever changed by your decision to prioritize your career over their well-being. The number hit the chamber like a physical blow. Not one victim. Not an isolated incident. 17 deliberate acts of institutional betrayal. And that's just the ones who kept copies of their NDAs, Jasmine added quietly. Who knows how many others there were? Who knows how many young men you convinced to stay quiet without even requiring legal documentation? Jordan's mouth moved, but no sound came out. The fighter, the attack dog, the man who had made his career destroying others with righteous indignation, was completely, utterly speechless. The committee chairman looked around the room, unsure how to proceed. This had gone far beyond the bounds of a normal oversight hearing. This was something else entirely. A reckoning that had been 22 years in the making. "Congresswoman Crockett," he said carefully, "while these are certainly serious allegations, I'm not sure this is the appropriate forum." "With respect, Mr. Chairman," Jasmine replied, "when is the appropriate forum? When is the right time to hold powerful people accountable for systematically silencing sexual abuse victims? When exactly should we address the fact that a sitting member of Congress spent years covering up institutional sexual assault?" The questions hung in the air like an indictment. There was no good answer, and everyone in the room knew it. Jordan finally found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "I was trying to protect the program. I was trying to protect the university. I was trying to—" "You were trying to protect yourself," Jasmine said, her voice like steel wrapped in silk. "The program, the university, those young men, they were all acceptable casualties in the preservation of Jim Jordan's reputation." She stood up, her movement causing a ripple of tension through the chamber. "But here's what you didn't account for, Congressman. Secrets have a way of finding the light, and when they do, they illuminate everything else you've tried to keep hidden." Jordan's chief of staff was now frantically whispering in his ear, probably advising him to leave, to call a recess, to do anything to stop the hemorrhaging. But Jordan seemed frozen, trapped between his public persona and his private shame. "You asked me what I'm doing here," Jasmine said, her voice carrying to every corner of the chamber. "I'm here because 17 young men trusted the system to protect them, and instead the system, led by you, chose to protect their abuser." She reached into her folder one final time and withdrew a handwritten letter. The paper was worn, creased from years of folding and unfolding, stained with what might have been tears. "This," she said, holding up the letter so the cameras could see, "was written by Marcus Thompson on March 17, 2001. 2 days after you had him sign his NDA. 2 days after you convinced him that his silence was more important than his truth." The letter appeared on the chamber's main screen. Written in blue ink, the handwriting shaky with emotion. "Coach Jordan told me that speaking up would ruin everything for everyone. He said the team depended on me staying quiet. He said real men handle things privately. He said I could either be part of the solution or part of the problem. I was 19 years old. I believed him. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I was protecting my teammates. But every day since then, I've wondered if my silence helped Dr. Strauss hurt other people. I've wondered if staying quiet made me complicit in something terrible. I can't eat, I can't sleep, I can't focus on my studies. Coach Jordan said this would make things better, but it's making everything worse. I don't know what to do. I don't know who to trust. I just know that I'm drowning, and nobody cares enough to throw me a rope." The silence that followed was profound and terrible. These weren't statistics or talking points or political abstractions. This was raw, human pain, preserved in a young man's desperate handwriting. Jordan's face had crumpled completely, not with remorse, not yet, but with the dawning realization that his carefully constructed wall of silence had finally, irreversibly, been breached. "Marcus Thompson," Jasmine continued, her voice soft but carrying clearly, "never wrestled again after writing that letter. He dropped out of Ohio State 3 weeks later. He moved back home to Akron, enrolled in community college, and spent the next 2 decades believing he was the problem. She folded the letter carefully, reverently, as if it were made of glass. But Marcus didn't stay silent forever. Because secrets have a way of eating at people, Congressman Jordan. The truth has a way of demanding to be heard. She reached for her final document. Not another NDA or legal contract, but something different. Something that made Jordan's eyes widen with recognition and fear. "This," she said, "is a recording device. A small digital recorder that Marcus Thompson carried with him when he came to your office on March 14, 2001. He was scared, he was confused, and he wanted to make sure he remembered your advice correctly." Jordan's face went white. "You can't. That would be illegal without consent." "Ohio is a one-party consent state, Congressman Jordan. Has been since 1974. Marcus had every legal right to record his conversation with you." Jasmine smiled, but it wasn't a warm expression. "Would you like to hear what you told him?" The chamber held its breath. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for. The smoking gun that would either vindicate or destroy Jim Jordan once and for all. Jasmine pressed play on a small digital device connected to the chamber's sound system. The audio quality was poor, muffled, distant. The kind of recording you get from a device hidden in a nervous teenager's pocket. But the voices were clear enough. "Coach, I need to talk to you about Dr. Strauss. Something happened, and I don't know what to do." That was Marcus Thompson's voice, young and uncertain and scared. Then came Jordan's voice, unmistakable even through the poor audio quality. "What kind of something, Marcus?" He touched me. During the examination. It wasn't medical, it was wrong." A long pause. Then Jordan's voice again, but different now. Careful. Calculating. "Marcus, I need you to think very carefully about what you're saying. These are serious accusations against a respected member of the university staff." "But Coach, it happened. I know what I felt. I know what he did." "What you think happened," Jordan interrupted. "These medical procedures can seem strange if you're not used to them. Dr. Strauss has been treating athletes for decades. He's helped thousands of young men. This wasn't medical, Coach. I know the difference between a medical exam and what he did to me." Another pause. When Jordan spoke again, his voice was lower, more intense. "Marcus, I've been coaching for a long time. I've seen a lot of young men go through difficult transitions. College is stressful. Training is stressful. Sometimes our minds can play tricks on us, make us interpret things in ways that aren't accurate. You don't believe me. I believe you're confused. I believe you're under a lot of pressure. And I believe that making wild accusations against a respected doctor could destroy your future at this university." The recording quality made it hard to hear Marcus's response, but his distress was audible even through the static. Jordan's voice came through clearly. "Let me ask you something, Marcus. How do you think your teammates would feel if they knew you were trying to destroy the medical support that keeps them healthy? How do you think your parents would feel if they knew their son was spreading rumors that could damage the reputation of their alma mater?" "I'm not spreading rumors, Coach. I'm telling you what happened. What you think happened. And even if something inappropriate did occur, which I'm not saying it did, is destroying your own future really the best response? Is hurting your teammates really the right thing to do?" The manipulation was breathtaking in its cruelty. Jordan wasn't just dismissing Marcus's trauma. He was weaponizing the young man's loyalty, his sense of responsibility, his fear of disappointing others. "I don't want to hurt anyone, Coach. I just want it to stop." "Then let it stop, Marcus. Put it behind you. Focus on your wrestling, your studies, your future. Don't let one confusing moment destroy everything you've worked for." "But what if he does it to other people? What if my staying quiet lets him hurt other wrestlers?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. Even through the poor audio quality, you could hear Jordan's hesitation before he answered. "Marcus, Dr. Strauss is a professional. He's been cleared by the university, by the medical board, by everyone who matters. Your concerns have been noted and will be addressed through proper channels. But public accusations, wild rumors, media attention, that won't help anyone. That will only hurt innocent people. What about me, Coach? Who's going to help me? The pain in that question was devastating. A 19-year-old boy, hurt and confused and looking for guidance from an adult he trusted, only to be told that his pain mattered less than the institution's reputation. Jordan's response was swift and brutal. You help yourself by making smart decisions. You help yourself by thinking about your future instead of dwelling on the past. You help yourself by being part of the solution instead of part of the problem. The recording continued for several more minutes, Jordan gradually wearing down Marcus's resistance, convincing him that silence was strength, that loyalty meant complicity, that protecting others required sacrificing himself. By the end of the conversation, Marcus Thompson had agreed to meet with university lawyers to explore options for moving forward constructively. Within a week, he had signed an NDA and received a payment that covered his tuition through graduation. Contingent, of course, on his continued silence. When the recording ended, the silence in the Congressional chamber was absolute. No whispers, no shifting papers, no coughing or throat clearing. Just the weight of 22 years of buried truth finally seeing daylight. Jordan sat motionless, his face a mask of shock and dawning horror. Not horror at what he had done. He had lived with that knowledge for decades. Horror at being caught. Horror at having his private calculations exposed to public scrutiny. Jasmine spoke into the silence, her voice quiet but carrying clearly. That recording was made 22 years, 7 months, and 18 days ago. Marcus Thompson was 19 years old. He trusted you. He came to you for help, for guidance, for protection. And you used that trust to silence him. She stood up, her movement drawing every eye in the chamber. But Marcus Thompson isn't 19 anymore, Congressman Jordan. He's 41 years old. He's a licensed counselor in Columbus, Ohio. He specializes in helping survivors of institutional abuse. And 3 weeks ago, he decided he was tired of carrying your shame. Jordan finally found his voice, though it came out as a rasp. This is entrapment. This is a setup. You can't ambush someone with evidence, Jasmine interrupted. With their own words? With the consequences of their own choices? She shook her head. Congressman Jordan, the only person who set you up was yourself. 22 years ago, when you chose your career over a boy's safety, when you chose institutional protection over individual justice, when you chose silence over truth. The committee chairman was frantically consulting with parliamentary staff, trying to figure out how to handle a situation that had spiraled far beyond normal procedural bounds. But there was no precedent for this kind of reckoning playing out in real time on national television. Jordan tried desperately to regain control of the narrative. Even if this recording is authentic, and I'm not conceding that it is, it doesn't prove anything except that I was trying to help a confused young man work through a difficult situation. Help him? Jasmine's voice carried a note of incredulity that was devastating in its restraint. Congressman Jordan, in that recording, you spent 43 minutes convincing a sexual assault victim that his trauma was imaginary, his concerns were invalid, and his silence was more important than his safety. She reached for another document, not an NDA this time, but something that made Jordan's eyes widen with fresh alarm. This is Marcus Thompson's medical record from the Ohio State Student Health Center, dated March 20th, 2001, 6 days after his conversation with you. She held up the document so the cameras could see. Diagnosis: severe anxiety, depression, insomnia. Prescribed medication: antidepressants and sleep aids. Note from attending physician. Patient reports significant emotional distress related to recent traumatic incident. Declined to provide details but exhibits classic symptoms of PTSD. The medical terminology hung in the air like an indictment. This wasn't political spin or partisan interpretation. This was clinical documentation of the damage Jordan's manipulation had caused. Marcus Thompson was prescribed antidepressants at 19 years old, Jasmine continued, her voice steady but heavy with implication. Not because he was naturally prone to depression, but because a trusted adult had convinced him that his trauma was imaginary and his voice didn't matter. Jordan was now visibly sweating, his usual combative confidence completely evaporated. I was trying to protect him from making a mistake that would ruin his future. You were protecting yourself, Jasmine said sharply. And that protection came at the cost of a teenager's mental health, his trust in adults, his sense of his own worth and dignity. She placed the medical record on her desk and reached for her final document. This one was different from the others, not an official form or legal contract, but a handwritten letter on simple notebook paper. This, she said, was written by Marcus Thompson last week. Not when he was a confused and frightened teenager, but as a 41-year-old man who has spent 2 decades processing the trauma you helped bury. She began to read. Congressman Jordan, you probably don't remember me, but I remember every word of our conversation 22 years ago. I remember how you made me feel, small, confused, selfish for wanting justice, disloyal for seeking truth. I remember how you convinced me that my pain mattered less than your program's reputation. For 22 years, I've carried the weight of that silence. I've wondered how many other young men Dr. Strauss hurt because I didn't speak up. I've wondered if my silence made me complicit in their pain. I've wondered if the adult I trusted to protect me actually used that trust to enable my abuser. I became a counselor because I wanted to make sure no other kid would go through what I went through. I wanted to be the adult I needed when I was 19, someone who would listen, believe, and act to protect rather than to cover up. In my work, I've met hundreds of survivors of institutional abuse, and almost all of them have the same story. They trusted an adult to help them, and that adult chose to protect the institution instead. They all have the same question: why wasn't I worth protecting? I'm sharing my story now not for revenge but for prevention. Because as long as people like you face no consequences for silencing victims, other victims will continue to be silenced. As long as institutional reputation matters more than individual safety, institutions will continue to be unsafe. You asked me 22 years ago to think about my future. I'm asking you now to think about theirs. All the young people who are currently in situations like the one I was in. What will you tell them? That their pain doesn't matter? That their voices don't count? That protecting powerful people is more important than protecting vulnerable ones? I hope not. But your actions will speak louder than any words you might offer now. Jasmine folded the letter carefully and set it aside. The chamber remained silent, but it was a different kind of silence now. Not the shocked quiet of revelation, but the heavy stillness of judgment being passed. Marcus Thompson sent me these documents, she said, because he believed the American people deserved to know who they had elected to represent them. He believed that someone who spent years silencing sexual abuse victims should not be allowed to sit in judgment of others without facing judgment himself. Jordan's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. The man who had built his career on aggressive questioning, on never backing down, on always having the last word, was completely, utterly at a loss. The question isn't what I'm doing here, Congressman Jordan, Jasmine said, echoing his original challenge. The question is, what are you still doing here? How does a man who systematically silenced sexual abuse victims get to lecture others about accountability? How does someone who chose institutional protection over individual justice get to sit on committees that oversee the very institutions he helped corrupt? The questions hung in the air like smoke. Jordan had no answers because there were no good answers. His entire political identity had been built on a foundation of buried secrets and silenced voices, and now that foundation was crumbling in real time on national television. Jasmine gathered her documents, stacking them neatly, methodically. She had delivered her evidence. She had told her story. She had given voice to the voiceless and power to the powerless. The rest was up to history to judge. Marcus Thompson asked me to tell you something, Congressman Jordan, she said, as she prepared to leave. He said to tell you that he forgives you. Jordan looked up, confusion and perhaps a flicker of hope in his eyes. "He forgives you," Jasmine continued. "But forgiveness doesn't erase consequences. It doesn't undo harm. And it doesn't exempt you from accountability." She stood up, her movement final and decisive. "Marcus Thompson survived your betrayal, Congressman Jordan. He built a life dedicated to protecting others from what he experienced. He turned his pain into purpose, his trauma into strength." She paused at the door, looking back one final time. "The question is, what will you do with yours?" With that, Jasmine Crockett walked out of the chamber, leaving behind a silence so profound it felt like the end of an era. Jim Jordan remained in his seat, surrounded by the wreckage of his carefully constructed image, finally forced to confront the reckoning he had spent 22 years trying to avoid. The cameras kept rolling. The silence stretched. And across America, millions of viewers sat transfixed by what they had just witnessed. Not a typical political hearing, but something far more powerful. The moment when buried truth finally demanded to be heard. But this was just the beginning of the fallout. Within hours, the phones in Jordan's office were ringing nonstop. Reporters, investigators, other survivors, political opponents, even some allies, all wanting answers, explanations, responses to the devastating evidence that had just been laid bare. Jordan's chief of staff tried to craft a response. But what do you say when confronted with your own voice on tape? How do you spin documentary evidence? How do you deny signatures that are clearly, undeniably yours? The first statement from Jordan's office was brief and predictable. "Congressman Jordan is reviewing the materials presented today and will respond at the appropriate time through proper channels." But that response satisfied no one. The evidence was too clear, too damning, too systematic to be dismissed with standard political boilerplate. Within 48 hours, 3 more former Ohio State wrestlers had come forward, not with new allegations, but with their own copies of NDAs bearing Jordan's signature. The pattern wasn't just confirmed, it was exponentially expanded. The House Ethics Committee, which had spent years investigating Jordan's colleagues for far lesser offenses, suddenly found itself with no choice but to open a formal investigation into one of its most vocal members. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The man who had spent his career demanding accountability from others would finally face it himself. But the most devastating development came from an unexpected source. Dr. Eleanor Martinez, now 78 years old and living in a nursing home in Toledo, had been Dr. Strauss's secretary during the relevant time period, and she had kept meticulous records. "My grandmother was a secretary for 40 years, her grandson read at a hastily called press conference. "She kept carbons of everything. She has copies of memos, meeting minutes, phone logs, everything. She always said someday the truth would matter more than the job." Eleanor's records painted a picture of systematic institutional knowledge and deliberate cover-up that went far beyond what anyone had imagined. Meeting minutes showed Jordan present for discussions about managing the situation. Phone logs showed calls between Jordan's office and University Legal Counsel immediately after victims came forward. Email printouts showed coordination between athletics and administration to minimize exposure. But perhaps most damning were handwritten notes from a staff meeting in April 2001. In Eleanor's careful secretarial script, Coach Jordan asked about exposure mitigation strategies. Legal counsel recommended NDAs for anyone who might speak publicly. Motion carried unanimously to implement immediate containment protocols. Jordan wasn't just complicit. He hadn't just been following orders or going along with institutional pressure. He had been an architect of the cover-up, an active participant in the systematic silencing of victims. The political implications were immediate and severe. Jordan's role as ranking member on the House Judiciary Committee, the very committee responsible for oversight of the justice system, became untenable overnight. Fellow Republicans, who had stood by him through previous controversies, began the careful dance of political distance. "These are serious allegations that deserve serious investigation," said House Speaker Mike Johnson in a statement that everyone understood as the beginning of the end. When the Speaker starts using the word serious about a member of his own party, That member's time is running short. Jordan tried to fight back, of course. He held a press conference, surrounded by lawyers and loyal staffers, maintaining his innocence and attacking the process. But something fundamental had changed. The man who had built his reputation on righteous anger and forceful denial seemed diminished, defensive, desperate. "This is a politically motivated attack designed to silence conservative voices in Congress," he declared, falling back on familiar rhetoric. But the words rang hollow. When you're defending against your own voice on tape, political spin loses its power. The press conference lasted exactly 11 minutes. Jordan left without taking questions, despite reporters shouting after him about Marcus Thompson, about Eleanor Martinez's records, about the 17 NDAs, about the systematic nature of the cover-up. His silence spoke louder than any denial ever could. Meanwhile, Jasmine Crockett found herself thrust into a role she had never sought, the face of accountability in Washington. Interview requests poured in from every major network. Speaking invitations arrived from law schools, advocacy groups, and survivor organizations across the country. But she turned most of them down. This wasn't about her political career or national recognition. This was about something more fundamental. The principle that powerful people should be held accountable for their actions, regardless of how much time has passed or how carefully they've buried the evidence. She did accept one invitation, to speak at Ohio State University, in the very gymnasium where Jim Jordan had once coached. The symbolism was intentional and powerful. Standing at a podium where Jordan had once given pep talks and victory speeches, Jasmine addressed a crowd of current and former students, faculty, and community members. Her message was simple, but profound. "Institutions don't protect themselves," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the space. "People do. People make choices every day about what they'll tolerate, what they'll cover up, what they'll sacrifice to preserve their own comfort or advancement. Jim Jordan made those choices, but so did others. And until we're all willing to confront our own complicity in systems of silence, nothing really changes." The crowd was respectfully quiet during her remarks, but the applause afterward was thunderous and sustained. These were people who had lived with the weight of institutional failure for decades. Finally, someone had said out loud what they had all been thinking. But the most powerful moment came after the formal remarks, during the reception. An elderly man approached Jasmine, walking slowly with the aid of a cane. She recognized him immediately from the photographs in her research. Dr. James Peterson, former team physician and one of the few medical professionals who had tried to raise concerns about Dr. Strauss's behavior in real time. "I want to thank you," Dr. Peterson said, his voice shaky with age and emotion. "I tried to speak up back then. I filed reports, sent memos, requested meetings. I was told it was being handled. I was told to let the administration manage it. I've carried guilt about that silence for 22 years. Jasmine took his hand gently. "Dr. Peterson, you tried to do the right thing within a broken system. The guilt was never yours to carry." "Maybe," he said, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "But seeing what you did in that hearing room, seeing you refuse to let them bury this again, it's given me something I lost a long time ago." "What's that?" "Faith that the truth still matters. Faith that doing the right thing still counts for something." As autumn turned to winter, the investigation into Jim Jordan expanded and deepened. The House Ethics Committee, working with federal investigators and Ohio state authorities, uncovered layer after layer of systematic cover-up and institutional failure. Jordan's political career, built on a foundation of righteous indignation and moral superiority, crumbled as methodically as Jasmine had dismantled his denials. New evidence emerged almost daily. Former coaches came forward with their own stories of being pressured to stay quiet. University administrators produced documents showing the extent of institutional knowledge and complicity. Most damaging of all, more survivors found the courage to speak publicly for the first time. Each new revelation made Jordan's position more untenable. Campaign contributors began requesting refunds. Political allies started avoiding his calls. Even conservative media outlets, which had previously treated him as a hero, began questioning whether his continued presence in Congress was damaging to the broader conservative cause. By February, facing certain expulsion from the House and potential federal charges related to conspiracy and obstruction of justice, Jim Jordan quietly announced he would not seek re-election. The statement was brief, attributed his decision to family considerations and a desire to pursue opportunities in the private sector, and contained no admission of wrongdoing. But everyone understood what it really meant. The man who had spent his career attacking others for their failures had finally been held accountable for his own. The announcement came on a Friday afternoon,